Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Lincoln Summer Events Day and our half-yearly meeting. It's lovely to see so many of you in the room, and welcome also to our online audience who are joining us at home today. Before I hand over to our chair, who's going to take you through today's presentations and meetings, I'm just going to teach those of you in the room a quick run-through of how to use your voting handsets. And for those at home, bear with me just a minute, and I'll teach you how you can go through the voting process on your devices. So, for those in the room then today, if you're eligible to vote, you should have these little BlackBerry-style voting keypads. We've only got 2 items to vote on today, and it's ever so easy to use. If you see there's a roller ball in the middle of the screen, this helps you to move through the motions. Now, if everybody could have a look at their screen and just check that their name is on the screen for me. If anybody hasn't got a name on the screen, just raise your hand and one of our team will come and get your device sorted out. Lovely, thank you. So whilst they're sorting you out, I'll carry on. So the rollerball helps you scroll through the 2 motions that we've got today. So like I say, there's only 2, so you can move it up and down, and then when you want to select the votes that you'd like to vote on, select the green square button on your device. That allows you to then have another screen that will say for, against, or abstain. So if you choose, again, your option by using the roller ball in the middle, go down to the option you would like, press the green button, and it'll say you would like to vote for, against, or abstain on this motion. And then you'll press green again to confirm that vote, and it'll go through for you. Now, to get back to the main screen then, to go to the next voting item, you just need to press the red triangle button. That'll take you back to the menu. You can scroll down to the next item and make your vote again for that one. So the voting itself will be opened when our chair opens the meeting shortly for you. You can vote on these 2 items at any time throughout the voting period until we say it's about to close. At that point, your final vote on your device is what will go through as your official vote for those 2 items. Between now and then, when he opens the voting, you'll be able to change your vote. If you suddenly decide you've changed your mind, just simply go back into the menu, scroll back down and change your option for you. But if anybody has any difficulties, just raise your hand and we'll come and grab you. Oh, I think we've got a lady just down the front here. They're coming. So, I think that's everybody for the room. Like I say, any problems, let us know. For those of you joining us from home today, your voting is slightly different. You'll see on your device there's a top menu which has got things like cast your vote, information, documents, ask a question. So on there, if you go into the voting tab, again, you'll see 2 items to vote on. You simply select for, against, or abstain, and your vote will go through. Again, if you'd like to change that vote at any point during the voting period, just go back into that menu option and change your vote. For those at home on their devices joining us online, you've also got some documents in the document tab that are relevant to the half-yearly meeting today. For those in the room, those documents were made available in our main central hall. And also ask a question. So for those here today, hopefully if you've had a question, you've submitted it on one of our Q&A cards. We'll get to that later on. Don't worry if you've forgotten or you think of anything while you're here. We'll ask questions from the floor later on. And for those at home, you by all means can ask a question, type it into that question box and send it through to us, and we'll get through as many as we can today. So, that's my little bit done. I'm sure we're all excited, ready for the main event. So, before I hand over to David Cowell, our chair of the Board of Directors, we're just going to watch a very quick video, and we'll get started. Hope you enjoy the day.
Heading out on our own with our hope in the clouds, and we're starting to see that we're onto something. Feel it coming, we'll keep running, nothing in our way, and we got no reason to wait. Let the journey take you where it wants to. We'll continue to find our way through anything we face. We got what it takes. Here we go. All we need is an open road and a chance to see a never-ending world that's beautiful. Here we go, with the sunlight on begins. Every step, writing stories that seek to be read, taking hold of the moment as we discover every color filled with wonder. Now we finally see we got everything we need. Here we go. All we need is an open road and a chance to see a never-ending world that's beautiful. Here we go, with the sunlight on our skin. It's a brand new day, it's ours to take, and we will let it in. This is where the adventure begins. Here we go. Here we go. All we need is an open road and a chance to see a never-ending world that's beautiful. Here we go, with the sunlight on our skin. It's a brand new day, it's ours to take, and we will let it in. This is where the adventure begins.
What a truly inspiring video. Doesn't it tell you everything we want to know and be proud of our Lincolnshire Co-op? Well, hello and a warm welcome to you all. We hope you enjoyed that video to start our event today. And as I said, it showcases some of our fantastic colleagues and will be featuring on our new recruitment website. This will be launching soon. I'm David Cowell, Chair of our Board of Directors, and your host for today's Environmental and Sustainability event, which also includes our half-yearly members meeting. The board and I are delighted that we are once again able to meet you face to face and to showcase such an important topic. And today, we will also be joined by a live online audience of members as well. It's fantastic that we are able to reach so many of you, no matter where you are. With me on the platform today are, from my right, Director Steve Hughes.
Good afternoon.
They changed the script. On my right, Director Steve Hughes.
Good afternoon again.
Jackie Munn.
Hello.
Our Interim Group Secretary, Michael Burrell.
Good afternoon.
President Jane Moat.
Hello, everyone.
And on my left, we have our Chief Executive, Ursula Ledbetter. Welcome,
Hello.
Ursula. Vice President Claudia Nell.
Good afternoon,
And
everyone.
Directors Nicola Berry,
Hello there.
James Scott,
Good afternoon, everyone.
and our Chair of Audit, Ian Haldenby.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Also on the front row, we have members of our leadership team, and I'd like to introduce them to you. We've got Steve Galliard, our Chief Financial Officer. Can everybody see Steve? Well, give him a wave. David Durnley, Head of Funeral Services. Heather Lee, Head of People and Performance. Laura Dunn, Head of Marketing and Membership. Matthew Wilkinson, our Store Development Manager. Alistair King, Pharmacy Operations Manager. And a very important man, certainly to me on my iPad, Alan Bullman, our IT Support Manager. Sorry, Dale, you'll have to come second. I'm sorry, you're off my list. Dale Anderson, Infrastructure Manager. Nick Jones, Service Support Manager. Together with our guest speakers, they'll be answering your questions that have been submitted in advance, online, and here at the venue today. These will be on topics important to you, such as our half-yearly report, environment update, and of course, I'm sure our guest speakers won't mind answering one or two questions after their presentations. We'll start today with our half-yearly members meeting, the agenda for which can be found on the back page of the half-yearly report. This was published on our website with a notice of meeting. A copy was also available on arrival today, and for those online, this can be viewed in the Documents tab. So, if I may move to item number 1 of the agenda, please. Please may I have your approval to sign the minutes of the annual members' meeting, which was held online on the 10th of December 2021. A copy of the minutes were made available to you on arrival today, and for those online, they can be viewed in the Documents tab. May I please sign these as a true and correct record? Please cast your votes on your keypads here at the venue or on your devices at home now. You can vote or change your vote on any of the motions at any time during the meeting until the final vote on motion 2 is concluded. If you're having any difficulties with the keypads, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, there's a whole range of them. Right.
It is quite tricky.
Just be patient. We are coming to try and sort all this out for you. Yep. We didn't have this number last year, did we, in terms of problems with voting? It was all very straightforward.
No. The rollerball thing's quite tricky. Yeah. The rollerball thing's quite tricky too.
Is it?
To nap, yeah. What you, yeah. So, at least people are asking. Getting educated.
I think we're just about there. Have we now been able to resolve the various issues? Everybody content? In that case, if I may, I'll move on to item 2 on the agenda. This is the half-year report for the 6 months to 5th of March 2022. Before we vote on this item today, I'd like to invite our Chief Executive Officer, Ursula Leadbetter, to deliver the first update on the report. Ursula.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon, members. It's wonderful to see a full auditorium and to say hello to our members online as well. It's great to be here, face-to-face, talking about the last 6 months, and goodness, we do have a lot to report to you. And although in many ways it felt as if we were moving on from those extreme circumstances of COVID-19, it did still dominate all of our activities and presented challenges as we have moved forward carefully. So this half year, which is to March 2022, was radically different to the same period last year, when you remember there were national lockdowns throughout that period and also tough travel restrictions in place. So with people free to travel again, whether that was just a car journey or a holiday, you'll not be surprised to hear that sales increased from just £500,000 to 16.6 million in our travel branches, And that's both new bookings and the previous bookings which were delayed by COVID restrictions and which we are now accounting for. And I have to say the travel team did a brilliant job at unpicking holidays, getting people sorted out and rebooking them, sometimes several times. So it's good to see all that coming back and people being able to get away and see loved ones. And sales were also up 61% in our petrol stations as everybody got back out and about. In our food stores, our team dealt with the impact of worldwide distribution challenges and labour shortages, which caused significant gaps on our shelves last autumn, and our teams did really well to maintain sales levels and service across that 6-month period. In our pharmacies, we were heavily involved in the pandemic response, whether distributing over 56,000 lateral flow tests or administering in 2 hubs COVID-19 vaccinations. And of course also maintaining our high levels of service in dispensing prescription medications, and that was up 1.3% in that period. The lifting of COVID restrictions has meant that colleagues in our funeral homes and our crematorium can now provide that wider range of services again, which is very welcome for our clients. And we're now implementing the new regulation covering all funeral plans, which comes into force towards the end of next month. And that's going to give customers stronger consumer protection, so we're very supportive of it. If you do have a funeral plan with us, we will have written to you recently to tell you about the change, and we're seeking consent to transfer the oversight of your plan to our chosen provider, Ecclesiastical, but it will remain invested with Royal London as now. If you want more information about this, our funeral team are here today, or you can contact us anytime, and thanks to the thousands of you who have responded to that already. So overall in the half year, our sales rose from £170.7 million to £195.4 million, and that's mainly due to that bounce back in travel. Our group trading surplus rose 8.2% from £8.2 million to £8.9 million. But we know the uncertain economic conditions, inflation and rising costs mean there are tough times to come for the public and for businesses, and we are preparing for this. But because we're a strong and resilient organisation, despite those pressures, we're continuing to grow and to support our communities. So that concludes my section of the report, and I'll hand you back to our chair, David Cowell.
Thank you, Ursula. Our society has had a busy first half year, delivering on our purpose of making life better in our communities. And I'll give you some of the highlights from the half-year report now. Our colleagues are vital to providing our valued services across our communities, and we recognise them, lots of them, during Colleague Award Week. We gave out our Branch of the Year honours and bestowed awards on individuals and teams who have gone the extra mile. The prestigious overall Team of the Year award was given to the group of colleagues involved in setting up our 2 COVID-19 vaccination centres, the first of which was operating less than a month after applying to deliver the service. It continued to be a challenging time for our colleagues. We've kept offering coaching and counselling and have given our team thank you gifts. Extra colleague discount during January gave everyone a welcome boost. And the profit share bonuses paid in November 2021 and April 2022 saw colleagues given the equivalent of over a week's extra pay. Looking to the future, we have an extensive pipeline of services development. Work is ongoing on our 4 new food stores in Skellingthorpe Road in Lincoln, Retford, Barnetby and Barrowboy. We have also secured planning permission for a new funeral home in Horncastle, which will provide our clients and colleagues with a much improved environment. One of the ways we've cared for our health and well-being is by running 2 COVID-19 vaccination centres in Newland Pharmacy, Lincoln, and Parkside Pharmacy in Boston, which both remained busy during the half year. We also extended our community flu vaccination service in the autumn, running clinics giving free flu jabs to eligible adults in 11 community centres. Our colleagues were also all able to take advantage of a free flu jab if they chose to do so. As healthcare settings, our pharmacies are subject to tougher COVID-19 restrictions, but still provide a range of vital community health services. More referrals are coming from GP practices and the 101 non-emergency system. And, of course, our new medicines consultation service numbers grew. The Lincolnshire pilot that we are part of, which is offering home testing kits for urinary tract infections, is a really innovative scheme, using app technology for self-diagnosis, and recently got picked up by the Telegraph. We are hoping that the scheme is rolled out more widely in the future. Our network of over 60 volunteer-run wellbeing walks are now up and running again. We're introducing new routes too, part of the National Ramblers Wellbeing Walk scheme. These walks provide social interaction and companionship, as well as exercise. We're thankful to all our walk leaders and participants who make the initiative such a success. Members, colleagues and customers help us raise money for good causes through our Community Champions scheme. From growing projects to community cafes, local food sustainability groups benefited from an incredible £186,909 worth of donations in November 2021. Kids clubs, cooking classes and communal spaces for learning about reducing waste and healthy eating. These were just a few of the 27 projects in the local area to receive help from the scheme. From December 2021 to March 2022, we were fundraising for 259 local community groups and charities. They range from local brownie groups, sports clubs, environmental projects, and many more. We were able to split a total of £212,265 between these deserving good causes. Our community champions over the last quarter have been Charity Breast Cancer Now, and we've done sponsored walks and bike rides, hosted fundraising events in our outlets, and sold pin badges in selected outlets. The total raise will be announced soon. Recruitment is a challenge for many employers due to the pandemic and economic uncertainty. We have faced our own difficulties across our businesses. One way to address this is to offer opportunities to people who need to develop their skills to become work-ready. We do so through several schemes, including Get Into Retail, run in conjunction with the Prince's Trust, and the government's Kickstart initiative. In total, 31 people completed these two programs this year, and 20 of them were offered positions with us. Before Christmas, we undertook 2 appeals designed to help local people during the festive season and beyond. Our Travels Toy Bank campaign saw an estimated 680 gifts donated to our travel branches, which then shared them amongst good causes, supporting disadvantaged families in the area. We ran our food bank advent calendar in food stores, encouraging people to donate a different item to the local food bank every day in December. The scheme is designed to ensure the organisations have enough in stock to help people in January, when donations are traditionally lower. In support of Anti-Slavery Day, our pharmacies distributed over 4,500 leaflets and printed helpline details on almost 13,000 receipts. Victims of modern slavery find themselves isolated. However, they are often able to access healthcare settings independently, and we do hope this campaign enabled this potentially life-saving information to get to those in need. That concludes my update on the report. I shall now hand over to our President, Jane Moat, to deliver the next part. Jane.
Thank you, David. We were delighted to be able to hold our first in-person membership events for 2 years in December 2021. We held 7 annual members' meetings across the county and combined 2 of them with online streaming like today for those who wish to take part from home. Thank you very much to the 650 members who joined us at those events. 8,630 members signed up for dividend cards this half year, including 747 junior members. Our free fruit scheme is still popular, with 18,143 apples, oranges and bananas given to youngsters in January 2022, which I think is fabulous. Our society started in 1861 with just 74 members, and this year we celebrated signing up our 300,000th member. Ethan? That's Mr. David Todd, and David's from Tattershall, and he's on the picture, I believe, now. We held a celebration at Mr. Todd's local outlet, the Tattershall Food Store, and presented him with £300 in dividend. Additionally, 300 other members were randomly selected to receive £30 dividend onto their cards. Colleagues, members and customers are banding together to support those displaced by the crisis in Ukraine. Our pharmacies are hosting collection points for essentials as part of a collection organised by the Polish school in Lincoln. All the items are transported to Poland and distributed by Fundacja Ahmed, excuse my pronunciation, a charity working on the ground supporting Ukrainians. We also supported the Disasters Emergency Committee's Ukraine humanitarian appeal with a £10,000 donation. The appeal is working to provide food, water, medical assistance, protection and trauma care in Ukraine and the surrounding countries. We also have an environment group which has representatives from across our businesses reviewing our activities and identifying ways to lessen our environmental impact. This year, we have appointed a sustainability advisor to help us set meaningful goals for Science-Based Targets Initiative, which we'll hear more about in the update coming up later. Alongside FareShare Midlands and other organisations, we were one of the founders of the Lincoln Food Redistribution Hub. It takes unsold food from retailers and suppliers and shares it between organisations that can use it to support people in need. Between the launch in July 2021 and in February 2022, the pilot project has redistributed over 65,600 kilograms of food, which is the equivalent of 156,195 meals to over 20 groups. Looking after the local environment is also about making the best of our surroundings, and we're part of an exciting project to give one of Lincoln's most iconic buildings a new lease of life. In partnership with the University of Lincoln, our property team are transforming the former Barbican Hotel on St Mary Street, which a lot of you will know. It will be redeveloped into a much-needed, creative and social space for the city, reopening in 2023 as the Barbican Creative Hub. This year, we were also honoured at the Greater Lincolnshire Construction and Property Awards for our work on the adjacent Cornhill Quarter project. Our team walked away with the Development of the Year in the over 5 million category award. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. And also, thank you to Ursula, whom you may have heard is retiring at the end of this year and leaving the Society after, I think it's 37 years, almost 38. I'd now like to take a moment just to say our sincere thanks to Ursula for her time, wisdom, work, commitment, and inspiration over the last 18 years that she's been our Chief Executive Officer. Ursula, thank you very much. And I do hope a well-deserved retirement beckons. However, I assume probably that you will not be retiring fully. You're too busy a person to do that. I'd also like to pass on our thanks to Margaret Tranter, who is stepping down from our board of directors after 19 years of faithful and magnificent service. And I'd also like to put on record my sincere thanks to all our colleagues, without whom we wouldn't be here today, providing vital services to our communities or inspiring each other and every one of us. Thank you all. Before we move on to the voting for item 2, we have received some questions about our half-yearly report and in general about Lincolnshire Co-op from members submitted in advance of today, online and on cards here at the venue. I'd now like to ask Laura Dunn, our Marketing and Membership Manager, to read them out. Laura.
Thank you, David. We've had a number of questions in on Lincolnshire Co-op. The environmental-based questions that we've received, they'll be answered in the Q&A to follow that session, so don't panic if you've submitted one of those. I don't read them out now. They will follow in later. So the first few questions, I'm going to ask Matt Wilkinson, our Store Development Manager, to come up and answer. The first one, I'll read them out individually because they're all quite different. Does the Co-op champion local food and will this be increased? And do you have any programmes, schemes or projects to improve the artisan food system? Matt, if you want to come.
Thank you very much, Laura, and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, absolutely. You will have seen on the video earlier, we work with a range of local suppliers through our Love Local scheme. Those products are easy to identify in the store. They have the green love heart with local highlighted on there. Those products are easily identifiable in store. But if you do know of any other local suppliers that we don't stock in the store, please do feed it through to our teams. We are always on the lookout for good local companies that we can deal with going forward. Thank you.
Stay there, Matt. Next question. We've had a couple of people ask this question. And I like this one because it's very poetically written. The smell of fresh bread baked in the store is missed. When will you reinstate?
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, it does smell great, doesn't it, when you come into a shop and it just, you know, that smell of freshly baked bread. We have in a number of our stores where we don't sell much freshly baked bread. We took the decision several months ago to retail a product that we class as Gadsby's Baked by Us. So it's the same fresh bread product, baked daily, but it's baked at our central Gadsby's warehouse and shipped straight out into the store. It is just more efficient for us and allows us to continue that supply of product that everybody likes within the store. But we will take your feedback on board, and if we can get sales to a certain level, we can assess that going forward. Thank you.
Next question. How do you justify closing deli counters and increasing plastic wrapping? And why do you not join with local businesses, e.g. butchers and bakers, to enhance total local quality and choice?
Thanks again, Laura. And yeah, good question. We did take the difficult decision probably 3 or 4 years ago now to close our deli counters. This was unfortunately due to increasing cost and declining customer numbers. And in terms of the plastic argument, it was always a difficult one for us to answer. A difficult one for us to get right, because the products that were sold on the deli counter, they came pre-wrapped in plastic packaging and case packaging. They were then on display, and while they were open, they were put on a piece of plastic. They were then wrapped in plastic. So the balance between that and having an individually sealed product that is fit for display to go forward, it kind of balanced itself out for us. But I say, delicatessen counters have been closed for a number of years in our store. And with regard to working with the local products, I've just mentioned our great bakery, Gadsby's of Southall. We do class that as a local supplier for us. That is our own bespoke bakery in Southall. They make all kinds of products, and that product is, baked daily, delivered freshly to every one of our stores, and it is a great range in store. And in terms of butchers, yeah, we work with a number of local butchers. Mountain Boston sausages is one, and Uncle Henry's are the ones which spring to mind straight away. But yeah, always looking to continue our relationship with local suppliers.
And last one for you, Matt. Why are we closing the Nunsthorpe Co-op? It's been this members' co-op for local co-op for a number of years.
Thank you again. After operating on Unstopped Store for over 20 years, we've taken the decision to transfer the business to another local retailer. The business will be transferred at the end of the month and to a local operator called Tag Retail, and will be rebranded to Aspire Fascia. We are grateful to our members and customers for their business, and I'd like to take this opportunity to especially thank our colleagues who will be transferred across to the new operator as part of the sale. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. You can leave. And the next question is a pharmacy-related one. I use the Co-op pharmacy delivery service, and twice now they have not arrived before I've run out. I've given 5 days grace each time. How much grace do I need to give, and do I need to send it in 2 weeks in advance just to be safe? Can I get Alistair to come up and answer that question from our pharmacy team? Thanks, Alistair.
Good afternoon. There are two main variables when you order a prescription. There's the part that takes place in the doctor's surgery, and then the part that takes part in the pharmacy. When you order the prescription, the GP will have to consider your request, and then they will generate and then transmit the prescription down to the pharmacy. We obviously have no control over that, and sometimes there is delays at the doctor's end of the arrangement. Once it comes to us, ideally, we should turn it around within 3 working days, and the vast majority of the time, that's what we do. So, as the question said, 5 days under normal circumstances should be more than adequate. 2 days at the GP surgery level, and then 3 days at our level, and then we get the delivery out to you. There has been circumstances recently around manpower issues where we've been short-staffed. Bank holidays tend to cause major issues. We get huge downloads of prescriptions all at the same time. And there are also a lot of issues at the minute around supply chain, and sometimes we are struggling to get sort of common medications. So there are the main parts, but then there are also sometimes other variables. If at any point you are struggling and you're running out of medication, by all means contact us. There is the possibility of us returning the prescription back to the NHS spine, and you can then collect, or a member of your family or friend can then collect the prescription at the local pharmacy. But as I say, 5 days under normal circumstances should be adequate. And I apologise if that hasn't been met in the past, but we will certainly strive to achieve that in the future.
Thanks, Alistair. I'm just consulting my trusty iPad. I don't think we've had any online questions submitted. So I'd like to open the questions up to the floor. If you've got any environmental questions, if you could hold on to those, because we've got a panel coming up about that. But if there's any questions about the half-year report or any genuine Lincolnshire Co-op questions, please ask them now. If you raise your hand, we can come and get to you with a microphone. The gentleman at the front, Rick.
I don't know if it's really an environmental question, but it's about conserving. The pharmacy has been using white bleached paper bags, where your competitors are using brown bags, which we all know are more recyclable, and they don't have the bleach and the other additives in them. But also the Co-op is using plastic bags to put white bleached bags in. Now, I'm sure the board of directors support the environment and want to help things along. What is the mislink? This is my main question. What is the mislink between your management and the board of directors?
Right.
Thank you.
Pharmacy-related question. Do you want to come and try and answer, Alistair? Or do you want to try and divert to our environmental panel later?
I don't really have an answer to that.
Okay.
Your competitors are using brown bags. They've been using that for a number of years.
We'll take that one away and come back to you on that one. I don't think anyone here has got the expert knowledge on that one. Thank you for your question. Anyone else? Can't see any hands. You're burning with the environmental questions for later. Okay, I'll hand you back to David. Thank you very much.
Has the board of directors offered any comment? And this was my question, was really to them. You know, what is the mislink between the department and the directors?
I don't think it's fair to say there's actually a mislink between the board of directors and the management. We are all of one purpose to try and make sure we can be as eco-friendly and sensible in the use of materials. I suspect this will be far better subject to a detailed answer, but for me it's probably a matter of things that we're trying to achieve and process. So let me assure you, that the management and the directors are well and truly engaged and are acting together. There is no mislink of any type. You're very welcome. So, thank you, Laura, and also to all my colleagues for answering those questions. If you weren't able to answer your question today, we'll get in touch with you separately to let you have the answer. That will cover off certainly in terms of the use of bags. If there's something you didn't get a chance to ask, please do come and speak to us after the meeting, or if you're joining us from home, get in touch with the membership team whose contact details can be found on the information tab. This now brings us on to the voting for this item. Would members agree to receive the half-yearly report? Please cast your votes on your keypads here at the venue or on your devices at home now. This is the last item we'll be voting on today, so please ensure your votes for items 1 and 2 have been submitted. Thank you. I didn't see any hands going up, so that's encouraging.
I think we've got the gist of it now. It was much easier second time.
It's quite fiddly though, isn't it? With
Just
that?
got to know how it works.
Reminds me of the old BlackBerry, which is a BlackBerry, isn't it?
Yes.
That brings us to the end of the voting on all the motions for today. We'll just wait a few moments while the votes are assimilated and displayed on the screen. There they are. So you can see the votes cast for each resolution now, and I'm pleased to declare that all resolutions have been carried, and by a very significant majority. Thank you very much. We will include the voting numbers in the minutes of the meeting. So that brings us to the end of the formal annual meeting, which I will now formally close. We shall now move on to today's topic and our guest speakers. Firstly, we're joined by Sam Turner, our Community Engagement Manager, who will be giving an update on our environment and the sustainability plans. Sam.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to go through a fairly quick update about some of the things that we've been working on at Lincolnshire Co-op. Just to explain, I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Lincolnshire Co-op, and I'm actually part of the wider environment group, which I think Jane mentioned earlier. And we're a group of people who represent across the whole business, who kind of sustainability is part of their job. But we also do have Kirsty, our sustainability advisor, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, or else she would have been up here talking to you. So I will try and cover it, and we will do some questions afterwards, and some of my colleagues are here to help answer those questions. So I'm just going to start with carbon emissions. Big question, big one to start with. We have been measuring our carbon emissions, and in 2021, this was 2,816, I need to say that right, tonnes of CO2 equivalent. And for us, we've included in this our usage of gas, refrigerant leaks, fuel, and it also takes into account the fact that all of our electricity was green. So we're continually looking at ways to reduce our carbon footprint. For example, we use energy-efficient LED lighting in all of our buildings, not just our stores. And a third of our food stores have a building management system, which enables us to monitor things like lighting and heating and energy use, so that we can try and optimise the usage or reduce the usage. In the last few years, we've been investing in significantly reducing and upgrading older heating and refrigeration systems across our stores and our estates. We're currently looking at a programme of replacing old refrigeration equipment, removal of the last few gas boilers that we have in the business. But whilst we're working hard to reduce our emissions, and measure them. This hasn't been verified externally, so that figure I gave at the beginning is just something that we have calculated internally. So to help us going forward to agree targets and identify further areas for improvement, we are signing up to the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which was mentioned before. And for those of you that don't know of that or haven't heard of it, the Science-Based Targets Initiative defines and promotes kind of best practice in target setting for businesses, and it independently assesses and approves company targets in line with really strict criteria. So we want to be really careful that we're not what's called greenwashing, that we're actually kind of setting ourselves. So we've taken our time to choose the right kind of people we want to work with to make sure it's kind of challenging us with what we do. The science-based targets provide companies with a clearly defined path to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and this is in line with the Paris Agreement goals, which are limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees C above pre-industrial levels and pursuing efforts to limit warming to 1.5 degrees C. So that's what the kind of science-based targets is. And if you haven't heard of it, that's something you might want to have a look into because it's fascinating on what they do. Many other businesses have signed up to the Science-Based Targets Initiative, people like Marks & Spencer, the Cooperative Group, Aldi, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Unilever, GlaxoSmithKline, and many, many others. So that's the kind of route that we're going to be going down for targets. So moving on, thinking about energy use, for the last 15 years, 100% of the electricity we've used in our outlets has been green. We're powered by wind farms, which is quite an amazing thing to say that that's been for 15 years. However, I'm not going to stand here and say that everything in the world is rosy. The crisis that's affecting domestic energy is affecting commercial in exactly the same way. And our prices have risen dramatically, and actually our current supplier may not be able to commit to continue supplying renewable energy. So this is something that we're having to look at the options at the moment and see where that takes us. Fridge doors, we know that closing the doors in our own homes saves energy, and the same is true with fridges in our food stores. So we have doors on fridges that reduce energy consumption by around 27%. We first trialled these back in 2013. And since then, we've installed them in around 85% of our food stores. So that's around 80 out of our 94 food stores. And this actually puts us way ahead of most other retailers. Our kind of strength as an organisation allows us to really plan for the long term and invest in things like this that we know are important. And our plan, we automatically fit them in new food stores, and our plan is to invest in fitting them in all the stores to finish the rest of the estate going forward. So moving on, as I say, this is a whistle-stop tour. We're just picking on different things to tell you about. We can't possibly cover everything, but we'll try and cover quite a bit. Around waste and recycling, we actually offer soft plastic recycling in 87 of our food stores. It's a scheme led by our buying group. So within our food stores, we actually buy all of our produce through a national buying group, and this is led by them. And it means you can dispose of materials like bread bags, crisp packets, chocolate wrappers in an environmentally friendly way. If any of you have started doing this recently, you'll be probably quite horrified at how much of this stuff, I'm seeing some nods, we were throwing away before there was an easy recycling system. And thankfully, through our network of stores, we're now offering this to people. So we have estimates from WRAP who suggest that 760,000 tonnes of plastic film end up in the UK waste stream every year, and with over half of that coming from households. So it's us that can make that change and make that difference. The soft plastics we collect in our stores are recycled in the UK. They don't get sent anywhere. They're turned into plastic pellets, and then they're made into new materials such as bin liners, kind of hard plastic products like buckets, and actually materials for the construction industry. So that's what the plastic's used for. And there is actually some information that on the food stand in the exhibition area. We are happy to report that we are zero waste to landfill. So all of food, paper, cardboard, plastics, medicines, equipment, computers, phones are all diverted away from landfill. So in reality, this means that it's either reused, recycled, composted, or sent to energy recovery, the very last bits that we can't do. But we appreciate that the most important thing is reducing the waste. So it's not just about what's done with it, but actually trying to reduce it. And that's something that we're working hard on. How do we reduce that waste in the first place? Thinking about waste, focusing on food waste, this is something we get asked about quite a lot and people are very interested in, and rightly so. So to really help and reduce and cut some of that food waste from our stores, we have an active reduce to clear policy and a scheme where we actually sell products past their best before date. And this is, since we introduced this, it actually reduced food waste by about 37% in our stores. So that's a big increase thanks to people being sensible and buying stuff and using it, which is great. We've also worked, as you saw on the video or as part of the presentation, with National Redistribution Charity Fair Share. And as part of that Redistribution Hub in Lincoln, they were collecting from, I think, 20-something of our stores in the Lincoln area on a daily basis, all of our surplus food. But what we've actually found, that as part of this trial, it's been really unsustainable because we have such a small amount of waste at the end of the day due to some of those reduced to clear policies. And it was unsustainable from a cost but also an environment point of view, having vans driving around. So we're now re-looking at that. So as I said before, it's not always a perfect rosy picture. A lot of things that we do, we try, we see if it works, and then we go again, because there isn't always a kind of perfect solution to everything when it comes to being sustainable. We're encouraging our Costa Express customers. You'll notice we have Costa machines in a lot of our stores, and we're trying to encourage them to make greener choices on the coffee run. So we give an extra 25 pence of dividend when people bring a reusable cup to fill up. And we've worked out that a customer who grabs a caffeine fix 5 days a week, and we do have a lot of customers who come in every morning, buy their meal deal and grab a Costa at the same time. So if they do that, they would save 260 single-use cups. I'm sure some of you already did that maths whilst I was talking. But you would actually make an extra £65 a year in dividend. And then, of course, as you'll know, you get your bonus on top of that as well. So that's quite a large amount of money. That would be enough to buy you 18 lunchtime meal deals, or maybe a few bottles of Prosecco at Christmas. So, so just by having a reusable cup, you can actually save yourself some money and do good for the environment. So kind of moving on as part of that, we also introduced a range of our cups in our stores to enable people to buy a cup to reuse. And these are actually the world's first reusable cup that was made from single-use coffee cups. So it seems quite appropriate that those single-use coffee cups have actually been recycled and made to also try and encourage customers to switch. Thinking about other areas that we source from in our funeral business, our kind of entry-level coffins are actually eco coffins produced by a company called Life Art. And since September 2021, around 34% of our customers have actually made this eco choice. And that's quite a high number, showing that people really do want to, to make those decisions. And I think it's also important that we try and make it affordable for people. So this is a really fantastic example of that. Going back to food, thinking about sourcing, I mentioned that most of our food products, apart from the local ones, are sourced through a buying group, a national buying group. And through that buying group, 100% of palm oil in the Co-op brand product is sustainably sourced through the RSPCO certification. We have checked, and our Gatsby's bakers, as local producer, also only use sustainable palm oil. And we're actually just in the process of now asking all of our other local producers to see if they are, and if not, can we work with them to look at that. So that's another process that we're just currently going through. So moving on to thinking about travelling, another important part of the environment where we have impact. So we do have now 10 electric charge car charging points, sorry I can't say that, and we've got a further 4 that have been installed hopefully imminently, and we have more sites actually being assessed all the time, and these are all rapid, the 50 kilowatt rapid charge points, so that obviously people can get in and out fairly quickly. So we're hoping to expand that. COVID again stalled all of this, pardon the pun, but COVID slowed down the progress of installing these, but we're really hoping that we can actually start to get more of these across the county to make it much easier for people to travel in electric vehicles around the county. We're also investing in electric vehicles in our own fleet where they're viable options. So we've recently received 4 new plug-in hybrid funeral vehicles. We've got a further 2 on order, and one of them is arriving imminently. That's going to be a pharmacy delivery van, and then we've got one shortly as our community team. So now that the range is better on things like delivery vans, we're going to be looking at trying to get those installed, and I think in funerals we've got 2 more of the plug-in vehicles on order as well. But as I said before, it's never a perfect thing. So for example, in our Gasbys, we have our delivery vehicles have chillers in them, and actually at the moment the technology and the range isn't available. It's just not viable for us to do that. So we're just keeping a watching eye all the time on the technology, and when we can and it's available, then we'll look at switching to that. So very lastly, I said I'd try and do a fairly quick whistle-stop tour. Plastic bags and plastics is something that we get asked a lot about, understandably. So the legislation on single-use plastic bags changed in 2021, and we were required to charge 10p per single-use bag. We took this opportunity to introduce the new 100% compostable carrier bags in our stores. And we also introduced the fold-away bags. I think they're £1, and they're actually made from recycled bottles, and then they can be recycled when they're used. So they're the kind of longer longevity bags that we have available. We took the opportunity to remove the bags for life that we used to have, because studies showed that even though those hard plastic bags were supposed to be a bag for life, they actually quite regularly mostly got used as single use, and they were the worst kind of plastic, that kind of hard plastic. So that's why we got rid of those single use, well, they weren't supposed to be single use, the bags for life. The proceeds from the carrier bags goes to our community champion scheme around supporting initiatives that you've heard lots about already, which is fantastic. And interestingly, we thought we might share this with you, that after there was a huge decline in carry bag usage when the first 5p charge was introduced and then the 10p charge. But actually we've started seeing the use of carry bags increasing again. So this is something we're monitoring, and we're going to see if there's a way that we can encourage customers to keep that on the decline and not to go back up. So I think that's the end of the bits that I'm going to cover for you today. I hope you found it interesting, learned something new, and just see some of the variety and range of the things that we're looking at with Lincolnshire Co-op. And I think we'll be taking questions a little bit later. So thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I'm sure you may have some questions on our update, and we'll take these once we've heard from our guest speaker for today, which, without further ado, I am pleased to welcome Ed Gillespie, who is an environmental entrepreneur and author focusing on sustainability and innovation, whose aim is to help us understand the complex changes we face in today's world, from climate change to disruptive innovation, and provide us with some actionable insights. Ed, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, David. And good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. This is the third time I've been in Lincoln in the last 3 months, so I don't know what's happened. But it does mean I now have an intimate relationship with the high point of English road infrastructure, the A17 from Sleaford. It's almost like you're trying to keep those of us from Norfolk out of Lincolnshire. But I want to start on a moment of reflection. Who was aware that last Sunday was World Environment Day? Hands up. About 20 people, that's not bad. So, World Environment Day started and was initiated in 1972, the year I was born. The first World Environment Day was in 1974, where the theme was Only One Earth. And the theme this year circled back to that, Only One Earth. And I've spent half my adult life, the last 25 years, working on the issues that we're going to talk about today, with very little progress. Looking at the amazing achievements that Sam has just been outlining is encouraging, but we're going to have to step up the pace a lot more quickly in the coming years. And the thing is, it's not like we haven't had a good frame of reference in regard to this. It's like we've been given a beautiful, bountiful trust fund in the form of our one and only planet. And then instead of living off the interest of that trust fund, as we could have done in perpetuity, we've drawn down on it and are spending it wildly in a crazy bout of chronic short-termism. And so we've got to do something different. And I can't talk about anything in regard to these issues without obviously touching on the crisis in Ukraine. Because what Ukraine encapsulates is our interdependence and our interconnectedness that draws us all together, which is the very spirit of the cooperative movement. Because as we see right now, even this beyond the humanitarian crisis of the unprovoked psychopathic invasion of that country, we're also seeing the repercussions in terms of energy and food prices and the crises that are connected to those. So if we needed a starker, more salient reminder of the fact that we're all in this together, then Ukraine epitomizes that. And so it can feel, when you look around the world right now, that we're in the apocalypse. And I don't mean that in the Armageddon end of the world sense, but I mean in the true etymology of the word. The root of apocalypse is the drawing back of the veil, the revelation, to see the world as it's actually working in all its ugly, brutal truth. And that can be empowering, because if we understand what is going wrong, then we have a fair chance of doing something about it. And my job as a futurist is not to predict and analyze existing trends, but is to stretch the imagination of the possible, of where we could collectively and collaboratively get to if we were to align and work together in committed ways. And in order to do that, we have to listen very carefully to the real questions that the future is asking of us. Not to just do what might be pragmatically possible, but to do what needs to be done. And again, you can imagine President Zelensky having a similar conversation in his cabinet meetings, to do what needs to be done. And I get to do a lot of gigs, a lot of speaking gigs. I got to speak at a lawnmower conference recently. I get all the glamorous gigs. And this is a 125-mile-an-hour lawnmower. And now I don't know what the guys at this conference think the questions that the future is asking of them are. I'm pretty sure it's not, where's my 125-mile-an-hour lawnmower? So we've got to listen to the right questions. And you may be familiar, I do a podcast with the comedian John Richardson and my fellow reluctant futurist Mark Stevenson, called John Richardson and the Futurenauts, just completing our third series. Every week we take a topic, a big issue, and we unpick it by asking three questions. How effed are we? Why are we effed? And how do we un-eff ourselves? I'm going to keep it clean. So let's start off. How effed are we? I'm going to use this as a broad structure to talk about our situation in the context of sustainability. Well, with climate change, as I said, I've worked on it for a quarter of a century, since long before it became popular. I used to joke that when I first started working on climate change, it was a bit like wetting yourself whilst wearing a dark suit. No one noticed, but it gave you a warm feeling inside. Now, it's like teenage sex. Everyone says they're doing it. Very few people actually are. And those that are doing it quite badly. And these are old jokes, but I'm an environmentalist, so I recycle them over and over again. But the issue here is we've gone from denial to, oh, well, yeah, maybe it's happening, but it's not us, to, oh my God, this is really going on out there. And that puts us into a difficult position. So I put it to you that we're telling ourselves three key comfortable myths. One, that we feel like we know what's going on and what's likely to happen over the next 5 to 15 years. How does that feel after the last 3 years? Secondly, that we have a sense of control and that whatever happens, we'll find a way to tame it. And thirdly, that our leadership and decision-making institutions are up to the task. Yeah, again, lots of evidence to really back that one up right now. And I gave a talk at the Bank of England in January 2020, talking about low probability but high impact risks. And this was off the back of those devastating fires in Australia that burnt an area of land the size of Austria. And we were talking about three things in that workshop. And this was pre-pandemic, remember, January 2020. And we were talking about extreme climate change, pandemics, and we were talking about them, and economic crises. And now we have all three and war. So that just goes to show the caution we have to have at things that happen at the long tail of that distribution, the unlikely but the catastrophic. Because we're all familiar with flattening the curve. My God, we've had this as a mantra now for 2 years, where we bring in the protective measures to draw down the number of COVID cases within the healthcare system carrying capacity. But the same principle applies to climate change, where we have to bring in these interventions, we have to change our behaviours and our practices to bring down global emissions beneath that 2-degree global temperature change threshold, and ideally down to 1.5 degrees. Because as Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England himself said, we can't self-isolate from climate change. We are all in it together. And so let's just give a quick rundown of the situation. If you haven't read the 3,000 pages of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, allow me to summarise it for you. We are in a situation which is unprecedented. It's unequivocal that it's us. Actually, some of the changes we've put in place are now inevitable, and indeed some are irreversible on any meaningful human timescale. It is only going to get hotter. We've added about 1.1 degrees of temperature since the Industrial Revolution in 1850. We're going to get 1.5 degrees by 2040, and the past 7 years, actually, this slide needs updating, have been the hottest on record. So we're only going one way. It's only going to get hotter. The question is, how hot do we allow it to get? And when you look at the heat wave that has hit in India in the last few weeks, where we're getting temperatures of 49 degrees, that's hot enough to begin to melt the asphalt on the streets. In those conditions, we get something really quite terrifying. When you add in 100% humidity, we get what they call the wet bulb effect, which means the way that you cool down is through your perspiration, your sweat. And when we get high humidity and high temperature, your sweat doesn't evaporate, and healthy people die in the shade. If you want to read about this in a kind of dramatic way, Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry of the Future opens with a devastating chapter of a very similar heat wave in India in which millions of people die. That is not beyond the realms of comprehension right now. We've also got ice caps melting. You know, you probably saw the reports in the newspapers the other week, temperatures of 20 degrees at the poles. Again, unprecedented to see these levels of heat at what are supposed to be the ice caps. And plus, what happens when we put all this heat into the system is that the weather becomes more volatile. Think about it as bringing a pot of water to boil on the stove. As that water gets hotter, it begins to bubble more violently. And essentially, that's what happens with the global climate system. And so you get more extremes, you get more heat waves, you get more intense tropical cyclones, you get increased precipitation in highly localized intensive events. And we get longer fire seasons and longer droughts. And we saw that with the storms that hit in quick succession in the UK in February and March, with Dudley, Eunice and Franklin coming in back to back. And all of these have further economic implications as well as the social and environmental ones, because clearly these extreme weather events cause vast amounts of financial damage through the storms, wildfires, floods, etc. And some of the analysts in the insurance world say that because of the increased frequency and intensity and the cost of the damage of these events, we could be on a trajectory towards an uninsurable world where those premiums become untenable. And we've got a bit of a gap to close. So this is the kind of warming predictions. The blue band on that graph is our current trajectory with existing government commitments, policies and actions. So you can see that delivers something between a 2.5 and a 3 degree world by 2050. Oh, by 2100, sorry. The green band at the bottom is the decarbonisation curve, which is in line with 1.5 degrees. And you can see how steep that line comes down. Right now, we are trying to close a 20 gigaton of carbon gap by the end of this decade. And think of that in terms of simple maths. It's about halving our footprints in the next 8 years. Halving our footprints in the next 8 years. That's how hard and fast we have to go. And when you equivocate about this, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, just said, delay is death. As I said, I've watched this like a slow motion car crash coming towards us for half my adult life. But it does feel like we are finally starting to wake up. But it's not just climate either. It's also biodiversity. It's also the very stuff of life on Earth. And the best report we have on this, the Dasgupta review on nature-related financial risks, identified 3 areas. There's the physical risks, which come from the storms and extreme weather events I just described. There's the transition risks of organisations facing challenges of boycotts, protests, and moratoria. And then there's also the litigation risks. There are now 1,800 climate lawsuits pending against governments and businesses globally. So this is now becoming a legal battle. And really the only thing I want you to take from this slide is this idea of the fact that we've drawn down on our natural capital. So whilst we've increased our produced capital and our human capital many times over the last 25 years, we've actually got 40% less natural capital per person than we had 25 years ago. And looking at the kind of age range of people in this room, we can see we would probably have noticed some of that shift over our lifespan. And that natural capital is all of those wonderful species that we've lost. About 60 to 70% of animals with backbones have gone in my lifetime. I'll just say that again for effect. 60 to 70% of the animals with backbones have gone in my lifetime since 1970. That's on our watch that has happened. And all of this is being driven by a whole bunch of perverse subsidies from governments. Somewhere to the tune of $3 to $4 trillion a year are going into the very industries like the fossil fuel businesses that are the ones driving us towards the edge of the cliff. And if you've seen the movie The Big Short, which is about the financial crash of 2007, 2008, you will remember that it was the collateralized debt obligations and the credit default swaps that the financial industry was trading with each other that weren't underpinned by the requisite financial capital, which meant that when the music stopped, the whole house of cards fell down. What we're involved in right now is a big short of ecology, where all of our human activity is not being underpinned by the requisite ecological natural capital. And there is at risk of the whole thing beginning to unravel. So consider this as a series of waves. We've had the COVID wave breaking over us. We've got an economic recessionary wave. We have a climate change wave coming in behind that, and a biodiversity loss wave coming in behind that. It's not going to get simple, which has led people like management guru Charles Handy to say this is an age of unreason, where what we need is to think the unlikely and to do the unreasonable. And that's going to require us to have bold imaginations. The incremental business as usual change we've had to date is not going to be enough. So cycling back to those 3 key comfortable myths, I actually say we've got 3 key uncomfortable truths we have to face up to. One, that we face a whole bunch of unknown unknowns, that it's going to be difficult. We have to get more comfortable with some of the uncertainty that we're going to be experiencing. Second, the fact that we are very much not in control, and it would be arrogant and hubristic to suggest that we were. And thirdly, that leadership is just going to be part of the mix for responsible organising,
And we saw this through mutual aid networks during COVID and grassroots activity and so much support and care and love for people coming on despite government. So actually, the very spirit, again, of the cooperative movement is going to be vital. Because it doesn't matter, it's not just me saying this, I'm a director of Greenpeace, but it's also the World Economic Forum, which has 6 of its top 10 long-term risks as environmentally related, whether it's climate change, whether it's biodiversity loss, whether it's extreme weather events, or human-made environmental disasters, or even, in fact, pandemics and infectious diseases. Because we are highly likely to get more infectious diseases as we put in more pressure on ecology. COVID is a zoonotic disease which has jumped from animals to humans, as was HIV, Ebola, Zika virus. All of these are zoonotic viruses. So why? Why has it got this bad? Why have we allowed ourselves to get into this position? Don't worry, there's an upbeat at the end. I can see everyone's faces like, God, gee, this guy. So partly it's to do with the Great Acceleration. And this is from the Stockholm Resilience Centre. I try not to put too many graphs in presentations, and then I cheat by putting 24 on one slide. But essentially, you can see, it doesn't matter which of these criteria you look at, whether it's world population in the top left-hand corner or primary energy use, they all go exponential at roughly the same time, which is 1950. Now, usually, and no disrespect to the more venerable members of the audience, someone will put up a hand and ask a question and go, well, that's due to population, Ed. It's like, yes, partly. There were 1.6 billion people on the planet in 1900, and there are around about 7.6 billion people now, so clearly that has had an impact. But actually what it's really about is the planet starting to send back invoices to the economy. And climate change is just a symptom of our activities. It is a symptom of the fact of that ecological debt that we have accrued. Because actually, we've got a system which is driving us ever further and faster in a sort of headless chicken style fashion. I love this cartoon, which has a sort of ragged trousered businessman sat around a fire with some children with a dystopian city in the backdrop. And he just says, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, it created a lot of value for shareholders. And I do a lot of talks to financial audiences, and it gets the same laugh. And people laugh at truth. And they laugh at their own discomfort and awkwardness. And said, if it's true, we're going to have to do something about it. Because it's not just population, it's actually consumption. It's actually the stuff that we consume. 50% of global lifestyle carbon emissions come from 10% of the world's population. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is everyone in this room. So we are the bigger part of the problem. It's a champagne glass distribution. Ironically, this is what Oxfam calls it, because you can see it's very top-heavy. That bottom, poorest 50% of the population are only responsible for 10% of the global lifestyle carbon emissions. So this is as much about consumption as it is about population. And as they say in the movie Fight Club, we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like who largely don't care. Welcome to the hedonic treadmill of materialism. And we're more than that. And you know this as members of the cooperative society. We are citizens first, not consumers. And when you label people as consumers, you prime them psychologically and make them more selfish, self-interested, and obsessed with their own rights. And when we are citizens, we become more altruistic. We are interested in our responsibilities and our collective altruism and possibilities. So we need to reawaken our power as citizens, particularly when our leadership is failing us so badly right now. And as Maya Angelou said, the quickest way we give away our power is to think that we don't have any. And we do. Because right now you're being told that this transition is painless. That electric vehicles, a bit of tweak on farming, HS2, something insane like that, will help us get through this mess. And that's not going to be enough. There is a poverty of political imagination that we are facing right now, which is sending us all to hell in a handcart. Rather than fixing the energy system with the £15 billion that we've just taken as a windfall tax, let's call it a windfall tax, from the big fossil fuel businesses, we could have given £400 to every household to invest in community renewables. And we would have started the transition to a community-owned, participatory energy system. And instead, we've got another cash handout, which is just a sticking plaster onto a system which is broken. That's the level of the poverty of imagination from our political leaders. And this is painful. I mean, we have to acknowledge the cost of living crisis that people are facing, because we are experiencing the highest wholesale natural gas prices in history. So it's not surprising there's been all those repercussions. If there ever was a time to shift away from fossil fuels, it is now. And this is an absolute moment in time, not least because it's also driving the war in Ukraine. If we want to talk about the humanitarian aspect here, basically almost 3/4 of Russia's export revenues come from oil and gas, $3.5 trillion over the last 8 years. And worse, because energy prices have gone up as a result of this crisis, the Kremlin is making more money than ever before from those revenues. So it's actually funding the war. So there needs to be a cultural shift in terms of our attitudes to sources of energy and our attitudes to climate change. As Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for lunch. We can have all the strategies we want, but we have to embed this in our culture if we're going to deliver this transition. As they say in the movie, Don't Look Up, we don't want to look up. We'd far rather look down at our feet awkwardly than confront some of these uncomfortable truths. And climate change is not the same as previous challenges. People often make comparisons with the ozone layer. We fixed the ozone layer because the ozone layer was caused by one thing, chlorofluorocarbons coming from refrigerants and aerosols, and it was relatively simple to fix through the Montreal Protocol by bringing a global ban in and clearing up that mess. Relatively simple. Climate change is not a war, because as I said, it's at least driven by our lifestyles and our consumption, in which case it's a war on ourselves, and we're all on multiple sides at the same time. And it's not like an asteroid in the movie Don't Look Up. It's not an intergalactic accident coming at us, unfortunately, from nowhere in outer space. It's a chronicle of a tragedy foretold because it has vested interests in a deep history. So it's not a problem that we're going to fix. It is an era and a predicament that we're going to live through, as I've lived through for 25 years, and our children and our grandchildren will also be embracing this challenge because it's here, it's now, it's us, and it's clear. And, can I go back? Yes, sorry. And I think it's easy to get complacent when we work in or we're members of something like a cooperative movement because we feel like we're doing a good job. And I think you are, in terms of some of the ambitions and aspirations and some of the achievements that Sam was just outlining. But as Yvonne Chouinard, the founder of the clothing firm Patagonia, said, there's no such thing as a sustainable company in an unsustainable world. What we need is system change. It's not enough to just do it ourselves. And part of that comes from purpose. And this is why the cooperative movement is so powerful, because it's a purpose bigger than yourself. And without that, you're more likely to serve only yourself. People often say, what can we do as individuals, Ed? Stop thinking about yourselves as individuals, number one. And when we look at the wider workplace, it's devastating because actually the global survey that Gallup do in the State of the Workplace report, 80% of employees at work are not engaged or actively disengaged. 4 out of 5 workers are unengaged from their jobs. And that's partly because they feel meaningless and purposeless. And that disengagement is a symptom. It's not the root cause of employee dissatisfaction. People are genuinely unhappy doing pointless, meaningless work. And the wider market has been driving us towards that because it makes a good servant a bad master and a terrifying God. And we've elevated it up to the position of a deity. And that needs to be brought down. And all of this really is represented by the notion of willful blindness. And that's actually a legal principle that says you are responsible if you could have known and should have known, something instead which you strove or chose not to see, or crafted your own narrative of self-justification around it. And I think where we find ourselves in the emergent era post-pandemic, whereas a couple of people said, we thought we might get more out of the end of this in terms of optimistic change, and instead we've reverted back to normal, is this moment of looking ourselves hard in the mirror and asking whether we see Narcissus, a sense of self-love and self-congratulation, or whether we see catharsis and are able to have the difficult conversation. So what do we do? I've talked about how F we are and a bit about why. Let's try and finish on a high note about how do we un-F ourselves? Where do we go next to wriggle out of this cul-de-sac that we've blindly gone our way into? Well, I've alluded to it, but part of it is bold, public, creative vision and imagination. Asking ourselves what if. We are very poor at making big frog leaps of imagination. The future always feels like an extension of the status quo. And we're going to have to change that because we're going to have to make leaps. And why the cooperative movement is important in this is because of trust. Because we've got a crisis of trust as well right now. Trust used to be based on local relationships. It used to be handshakes and eye contact, your relationship with the local bank manager, the fact that they might know your family and the credibility you might bring to have a mortgage, best represented now by computer says no type of thinking. Because that trust was then replaced by institutions. And what's happening now is we're going back to distributed trust. We don't trust the institutions that are acting as our intermediaries. And a lot of this trust is now made online. And that institutional trust in itself was quite opaque and closed and licensed and quite top-down. And what we're having is a re-emergence of community-based trust through that online world, much more bottom-up and accountable. And I think that can be very exciting. We're seeing it in terms of the business movements around benefit corporations, where people have rewritten their articles of association to say that their primary function is not shareholder value. It's not fiduciary responsibility. It's on a par with creation of social and environmental value, much like the cooperative movement. And B Corp businesses have grown very, very rapidly as a result of having this meaningful social and environmental purpose built in. Indeed, B Corp businesses in the UK grow orders of magnitude faster than conventional businesses. And as I said, I've tried to weave a thread of the power of cooperatives through this because the Rochdale pioneers nailed it back 170 years ago when they said the cooperative ideal is as old as human society. It's the idea of conflict and competition as a principle of economic progress that is new. So the right idea we needed arrived bang on time 170 years ago and is still manifesting and growing now. Because even the IPCC says this. Actually, the best way to give effective and lasting protection from climate chaos is through action that addresses inequality. That is the best hope we have of reconciling this. So whether it's gender-based inequality, ethnic, disability, age, location, or income, the more we can address those inequalities, the more likely we are to be able to resolve this climate crisis together. And that requires us to break some of the codes of silence that exist around this topic. The omerta, the mafia code that you don't talk about these difficult things. We have to have those awkward conversations and sit with that discomfort. And in some ways, you listen to what the government says, we're on the road to net zero. We actually have a legally binding commitment in the UK to reach net zero by 2050. Whether we actually have the policies in place to deliver that is more questionable. But the fact the destination is agreed, it's only how fast we get there that's up for debate. And yet, immediately, that net zero target is becoming part of an ongoing culture war, where we're actually seeing the kind of sharpening of political swords in a Brexit-style fashion, which could mean to more entrenched division in regard to how we deliver it. And in some senses, this is about seven-generation thinking, trying to imagine what the world was like for our great-grandparents, and also at the same time imagining the world we want to bequeath for our great-grandchildren. and putting ourselves in the middle of those 7 generations as a pivotal generation that will change the world for our descendants and make us good ancestors. And my favourite writer from Australia, Tyson Yunkaporta, says, we have to remember at the start of a 1,000-year undertaking, because that's how long it will take for those old-growth forests to return. So this is the commitment we have to make, the forests we've spent the last 200 years cutting down. And a lot of people say, well, we're all focused on sustainability. Well, right now our culture and our economy is degenerative. As I said, it's drawing down and destroying that natural capital and turning it into financial capital for the few, not the many. And we are on a journey through sustainability towards being truly regenerative. We have to find mechanisms and ways of building back that natural and social capital. And that regenerative business, whether you're a co-op or whether you're a for-profit or a not-for-profit or a community interest company or whatever, that responsibility is on all of us. How do we become regenerative? How do we help build back nature and society? And it's going to get bumpy. I think I've made that clear in terms of the course of the talk. This is not going to be a smooth transition, which is why we need these powerful North Stars to guide us through the uncertainty and to the other side. Because I actually get a bit tired of people saying, we're going to do this to save the world. The world doesn't want to be saved. The world doesn't even want to be changed or rescued. The world wants to be loved. And the love that we have for the beautiful riches of the wild and natural world that has been bequeathed to us and is our stewardship of responsibility, that needs to be appreciated and we need to be grateful for it. And that will be the way that we psychologically begin to shift away from this ego approach which we have right now, which puts us right at the top of the triangle of life, where we're at the top of the food chain, where we look at it all. And even the eco approach, which we've embraced perhaps in the last 40 years or so, which has started to become emergent, or at least we put ourselves back into the cycle of life in some way. But actually, I think the Sanskrit idea of seva is even more powerful, which puts us at the bottom in support of all life. And that's a shift from being anthropocentric, when it's all about us as humans, to being ecocentric, to actually being in service to life, in the same way that we can be in service to each other. And the Japanese have a lovely term for this. They call it Ikigai, which is actually a combination of a Venn diagram of doing what you love, what the world needs, what you're good at, and what you might be able to get paid for. And when you combine those 4 things, something magic happens. And that's when you live a life full of meaning and purpose. And many people are now talking about the behavior changes that are required to help us deliver some of this Ikigai feeling. My favorite one is the jump, which is about less stuff, more joy. As I said, a lot of this stuff is being driven by consumption, so let us consume less. And they have 6 basic behaviors which you can adopt, which is trying to keep your electronic devices like this for at least 7 years. 7 years? Imagine that. I've had this for 3. It's starting to get a bit clunky, but it still works. Travel fresh, so obviously walking and cycling. Eating green, plant-based diets. Only buying 3 new items of clothing a year. Only 3. You can buy as much as you want from charity shops. Holidaying locally, having staycations in the UK. We all enjoyed those over the last couple of years. And doing one thing to change the system. So perhaps changing your bank or changing your energy supplier. And all of the elements of this are very much, I think, inherent parts of the cooperative movement, where it is about care and community and camaraderie and creativity and collaboration. And the best thing about those 6 behaviours that the jump expects us to undertake, or entices us to undertake, is they would actually create about 25% of the emission savings we need by the end of this decade if we all adopted them at scale. And they're quite simple. And they actually, I think, lead to a better life, which is not about sacrifice, it's just about smart substitution. Because I think the future is out there. It's just not evenly distributed yet. I'm privileged, and the thing that keeps me a dark optimist is the fact that I'm aware of and in touch with all of the projects and people doing amazing things all over the world, which are a representation of the future that could be. And they're doing it now. And the trouble is, the collapse is also out there at the same time. And essentially, the next 10 years is going to be a race between these two agendas. Things might well get worse whilst they also get better. And that's the thing we're going to have to ride out, because organisations that understand this are the brave ones. They're the ones that have the courage, that can see the future that needs to be delivered. And then we have the organisations which are resisting that change and putting the brakes on the urgent progress, which is a bit like Darth Vader saying the construction of our new Death Star is an amazing job creation opportunity. Yes, it is Darth, but it destroys planets. And I get very frustrated when people don't get what this means in practice, because essentially any investment of time or money that doesn't centre human behaviour on the environment right now, human health, is not an investment. It's a cost on the future that we're going to have to pay as part of that ecological debt. And the good upshot of this is also that when energy costs double, the investment period on some of the changes we need to make halves. So the consideration of that heat pump or that solar panel or that other renewable energy scheme, suddenly the economics of that have shifted wildly, even though we get into a slight crisis point in between. So don't be despondent, but equally don't project your own worldview onto the situation we're in. It's very easy to project our hope or our hopelessness. I think there's a lot of false optimism out there, which is a bit techno-utopian, happy-clappy, that technology will save us. And at the same time, there's a projected hopelessness, a sort of resigned fatalism, or the misanthropy of, humans are terrible and we deserve everything we get. Where we have to sit is on a tightrope walk between those two projections, between those two cliffs, and to do it with humour, humility, and hyper self-reflectivity, to ask ourselves the difficult questions. Because denial, as I said right at the beginning, can't just lead us straight into despair, and nor should it lead us into states of distraction, where we operate the willful blindness and we don't look at what needs to be done. It should help us shift to true determination to rise to the task. And if there's one number we should recall, it's perhaps this 2%, which was actually the annual percentage of global GDP required to tackle climate change year on year. As identified by the Stern Review 15 long years ago, 2% of GDP every year. COVID cost us somewhere between 3 and 4%, just to put that into context. 2% is also the annual percentage of global GDP that goes on those perverse subsidies that I mentioned earlier. So we don't actually need new money. We just need to shift that 2% from the perverse industries onto the things that we need to see happen. So it's not new money, it's just moving the money we already have. And if you want to set that in the context of Ukraine, right, I did at the beginning, 2% is also the required percentage of GDP we spend on military in order to qualify for NATO membership. So can we afford to do this? I don't think we can afford not to. And the trouble is that truth won't set us free until we develop the skills, the habits, but perhaps most importantly, the moral courage to use it. This is a situation of moral courage. Because ultimately, the wise learn from the past and the lessons of history. But as I said right at the beginning, when we're listening to those questions, it's the brave that learn from the future. And they were the ones who will deliver the world we need. A lot of it sounds impossible. But in this context, it's only the impossible that is interesting. So to quote some local lads, the Sleaford Mods, there's only one course, discourse. And then one of the most radical things you can do about the climate and environmental crisis is to talk about it and then act. Because we need to elevate this conversation to one that is urgent nationally and internationally, that it doesn't get pushed down the agenda by the competing short-termism news challenges. Because ultimately, as we learned through COVID, and we've learned through civil rights protests, and we've learned through the climate crisis, none of us are safe until all of us are safe. And if there's one thing that the cooperative movement represents above all else, it's that belief in the power of the collective and that responsibility to one another and to the wider planet. Because, as John Ruskin said a couple of hundred years ago, there is no wealth but life. Thank you.
And as they say, now follow that. Ed, thank you very much. Very interesting, quite magnificent in terms of the leap you want to try and encourage us to take. Very inspirational. So I hope you enjoyed listening to Ed's speech. So Ed, if I could ask you to come back onto the podium, please, together with Sam and together with Steve as well, to take some questions. I have some here which have been pre-submitted. I also have a nominal answerer for the question, but please do feel free to mix it up amongst yourselves. So I'll start with Steve, as you're on my left. Question for you here. Have you any plans for systemic change following circular economy models, such funding systems for a green economy, patient capital, and non-returns funding? Does that make sense to you? Steve, sorry.
I will try and answer it. Is the microphone on? So, I think I'll start by saying this was the meeting I wish I was in when I was volunteered to sit on the front. So we invite all our environmental activists from across Lincolnshire into a room. Then we have a fantastic speaker, and then we get questions, which is brilliant. In terms of the circular economy and around the green economy, yes, it's something we're interested in doing. Yes, we've done it before. And I think the co-op model actually lends itself to it as well. So we have invested in schemes that are cooperative-led, where we can put some share capital in, where it is long-term investment, where people can fund for the future. So yes, it's something we're interested in. Probably couldn't do it with individuals. I think credit laws would stop us doing that sort of thing. But for organisations, we can help in this area. So there's one or two we've done in the past. If people have got other ideas, catch me afterwards. Happy to have a look at it.
Thank you, Steve. Ed, what help will the less well-off get when there are only electric cars?
Oh,
please feel free to share it amongst the panel.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think the initial answer to it is we're still going to have fossil fuel cars for a while. I would rather see them phased out sooner. But obviously, there are now moves in Europe, in particular, to ban all new fossil fuel car production by 2035. But I think the issue here is also the relationship between the upfront capital cost of buying a vehicle and then the ongoing running costs. Now, clearly, the cost of filling your car with fuel has dramatically increased in recent months, £100 a tank, as we're all seeing in the news this week. And we need to help people move away from that. But whilst the upfront capital cost of an electric car is very high, the running costs are obviously much lower. I think the solution to this is not car ownership. Essentially, 90% of cars are idle for 90% of the time. They are the most insane collective misuse of stranded asset in terms of, you think of all of the vast amounts of money tied up in our vehicles, which we only use for a fraction of their lives. So I suspect the best solution for the less well-off is likely to be electric vehicle car clubs or some kind of car-sharing models, cooperative models locally, which are already, I mean, I lived in London for 25 years. I didn't have a car in London because it was idiotic to have a car in London. I've now moved to rural Norfolk, where I'm from originally, and I've been sort of bounced into getting a car. But I'm now trying to set up an electric vehicle car club in the village for those of us who don't want to own a car but might occasionally need to use one. I mean, I would say also there's always been this sort of dangling future possibility of self-driving, electric vehicles, thanks to Elon Musk. Unfortunately, they seem to keep crashing into things. Unsurprisingly, you would think. And one of the biggest challenges for artificial intelligence is to try and decide if it's in control of an electric vehicle and it's likely to get into an accident, which vehicle it chooses to hit. I mean, these are the types of programming challenges they have. And unfortunately, you know, you might have seen the news a week or so ago, but they also managed to be specifically crashing into emergency vehicles for some reason, and they can't quite work out what the glitch in the program is. But yeah, your self-driving car might decide to crash you directly into the ambulance, which might save time.
Thanks, Ed. Sam, here's an interesting one for you. Why do you have a stand that promotes criminal activity, to specifically Extinction Rebellion, and have exhibitors who make false statements and try and preach at you?
Okay, so...
Is that me?
No, I don't think that was aimed at you, Ed.
I think it was.
So we've got a couple of stands that we invited some local organisations to come and exhibit, and I think I would say that it would really be a question to them. We didn't vet what people were putting on their stands, so I think it's a really good question. But I would ask you to speak to the people manning those stands in terms of the organisations that they're promoting.
I would, if I could just add, I mean, as a member of Extinction Rebellion myself, I have to confess. I would say you may find that behaviour annoying, but I would say it's akin to the smoke alarm in your house, which, as you'll also know, when it runs out of batteries and makes that irritating ping all the time, reminding you that you need to replace the batteries in order not to get burnt to death. Extinction Rebellion is the necessary smoke alarm in the system, which has, for better or for worse, at least got the UK government to agree to climate emergency, the beginnings of citizens' assemblies to consult on changes. And I have to say, in 25 years of activism, and I sat in a Greenpeace board meeting when Extinction Rebellion appeared, and we all sat around the table going, who the hell are these guys? And where have they come from? But they have opened up a very different debate that wasn't there before. And I think that we should be thankful to them.
Thanks, Ed. Steve, how are plans to eradicate animal cruelty in co-op food systems progressing? And do you lobby for this throughout in the bigger, wider food system?
Okay, so I think as I mentioned earlier, we work with our national buying group. Our representative on that group is our Chief Retail Officer, Mark Finn, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, so he would have given you a really long answer. My short answer is all the co-op brand meat, poultry, dairy comes from farms that is accredited, so it's either going to be Red Tractor or RSPCA assured. So we should take some assurance from that. And then obviously we've got our wide and growing range of plant-based meals as well, which we're pleased to say they're affordable prices too.
Thank you, Steve. I'll go back on the line, so I'll come back to you, Sam. Are the co-op part of the Plastic Pact, organised by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation?
So Lincolnshire Co-op, I can only speak on behalf of Lincolnshire Co-op, obviously. We're not part of the Ellen MacArthur Trust Plastic Pact, but I have had a look at it, aware of it, and it covers things like eliminating unnecessary plastics and packaging, and through our buying group, as we mentioned, things like the bases on pizza used to be this kind of foam plastic, they're now cardboard. There's quite a few examples of things like that where they've eliminated the plastic packaging. One of the other things that they talk about in that plastic pact is around making sure that packaging is reusable or recyclable. And again, through the buying group, they've made a commitment to make all of our packaging of co-op brand products recyclable and easily recyclable, which means that's in most normal household waste streams. Mostly they've done that by making the plastics a single type of plastic, whereas they were mixed before, so it makes them easy to recycle. So, and then another thing was around increasing, allowing people, encouraging recycling. And obviously we've talked about the soft plastics, we mentioned earlier, recycling through our branches that now happens, and increased recycled content in items that we use. So for example, the co-op water bottles are made of 100%
recycled plastic and are recyclable. So whilst we're not part of that plastic pact actually in what we're doing, we are kind of following that mostly. You know, we had the example of plastic bags in pharmacy, and we are looking at that, eliminating and where we're using things like single-use plastics, even things like pens across the business, and that is something that we are challenging ourselves on.
Thank you, Sam. And whilst I have your attention, do you have any open collaboration schemes for students around the subject of food and pilot programs that I could contribute to?
We don't, but I would say, whoever you are, that's a great question. We'd love to work with you. So if you want to see myself, one of my colleagues, our community teams just the other side of the hall, if you want to leave us your contact details, we'd love to have a conversation with you about that.
Thank you, Sam. Ed, I've got two questions here which are sort of similar but different. So I'll do them one at a time. You can take your pick. So why is the focus still on centralisation of food systems?
No.
Do you want the second question?
Yeah, ask them. Well, let's have both.
That's one. And the other one is, do you have a systemic view of the food system and how you see it changing?
Yeah, I mean...
That might be more straightforward.
No, I mean, maybe if I answer the first one, the second one, it'll help the answer of the first one. I mean, a systemic view requires you to look at the relationships between all things, and particularly in a food chain and supply chain around food. You know, we all know that the UK is hopelessly food unindependent these days. You know, around about 50% food self-sufficient. And that's partly because of the terrible way we use our land. 85% of UK arable land, agricultural land, is used for livestock or livestock feed, which only provide about 20% of our calories. So if we took some of that land and started to repurpose it with more regenerative farming and agroforestry, we could both enhance biodiversity and give more land back to nature, whilst also getting more calories for ourselves and becoming more food secure and resilient. You will probably been aware that there was a big food review done by Henry Dimbleby, a UK food strategy consultation 2 years ago, which was actually quite radical. We're expecting the government's report on Monday, and the initial flagging is exactly what we would expect. A government saying it's not going to make any interventions on free school meals to make sure that 1 million kids who live in poverty get a decent meal at least once a day. It's not going to make any interventions on obesity, even though we've got 60% adult and 40% child obesity in the UK. It's not going to tackle meat and dairy in our diets. Basically, it's exactly what you'd expect from the poverty of political leadership we have now. And they should be hanging their heads in shame, because the number one job of a government is to protect its people. And right now, this government is fundamentally failing to protect its own people. And you can call some of these things nanny state interventions, but the fact is we are the sick man of Europe, and that was one of the reasons why we had 130,000 COVID deaths, because of our general level of ill health. So yes, I have a very systemic view on the food system. It's broken, but it's working for some. And it's working not for the people who are eating the food at the end of it, but it's working for intensive agribusiness in the middle. And that is not what the system should be there for. It is perfectly possible for us all to have a healthy, happy and delicious diet that also looks after nature in the UK and makes us food independent. And we are a world away from that right now.
Thank you, Ed. Steve, can you give a timeline for when electric charging points will be available for cars in co-op car parks? Please.
I can't give a complete definitive timeline. As Sam said earlier, we've got 10 across our training locations at the moment. Nick on our front row is working like mad to try and get them into more and more of our locations. We've got another 4 in the pipeline and more surveyed. Sometimes it's not right for us to put one in because there's one nearby and we don't want to duplicate. But yeah, we're very keen to get them in as many locations as we can across the county. I think the nearest one here is probably Dunholm.
Thank you, Steve. Sam, Would you consider fitting some bird nesting sites such as swift boxes, swallow house martin cups, sparrow terraces, etc. to your buildings or renovations and new builds? Also, perhaps some more nature-friendly planting around shops too. I wrote to the CEO a few years ago about these and was wondering if anything's been done.
Yeah, this is a great question, and anyone who knows me will know that this is very close to my heart. You will regularly see me in my jeans and wellies planting trees or doing anything similar. So yes, the answer to that is we are. So we, with our new stores, we have a new, a more kind of biodiverse friendly planting scheme that we've been having now for say 3 years, maybe something like that. So in our new stores, we already have that. We are actually working with Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust at looking back at some of our existing sites, and not just food stores, but anywhere where we've got green space, to see how we can make them more biodiverse. And we have looked at and are talking about things like bird boxes and all of those kind of things. So yes, we are making progress on that. We have already done it on new stores, and we're looking at doing that anywhere where we've got green space, really. So yeah, it's something that we're really happy to be doing, because as you mentioned, it's not just about it's about everything. It's about the biodiversity as well. So we do take that really seriously.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you to all who have submitted those questions. We will now move on to take any questions from the floor. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and then wait for our colleagues to bring you a microphone. So please, any questions? A lady, gentleman, lady over there.
Can the co-op confirm that all the chicken they sell in their shop don't come from, this intense farming of chickens? Because none of them are shown as being organic. So what does it mean? What sort of chicken are you selling?
Do you want me to take that one, David?
Yes, please,
okay.
Steve here.
So I'd say my understanding is, and I say it's a shame Mark couldn't be here to talk a bit more about it, but it is all the poultry comes from either RSPCA assured or Red Tractor assured. So that's the basis on which the co-op label chicken is in the stores.
Okay, thank you.
If you've ever been to a Red Tractor chicken facility, I don't think you'd be that impressed. It's a very low standard. It's a very, we could get into these standards, but the fact is, and I'm not a vegan, but I would say we have to bring, the problem we are facing is the amount of cheap industrial meat in our diet. And it is about much less meat and a much higher quality meat that has hopefully enjoyed a much higher quality life.
Thank you. There's a gentleman just over there.
My question really is, what are your plans for generating your own electricity for your own stores, namely solar panels on roofs, maybe even turbine out the back, but certainly trying to lead the way, like I suggest Ed's thinking is, if we don't lead by example, then how can we expect others to follow?
Good question. Steve, I think that's down to you again.
Yeah, so we're really keen on solar. We had it on, I think we've got 12 sites where we've put it on at the moment. Unfortunately, the economics didn't work at one point when this definitely isn't a political comment, it's a general comment. When the feed-in tariffs were removed at quite a fast pace, it didn't allow the industry to keep up with that adjustment. And at that stage, unfortunately, we had to start putting them on. As Sam said earlier, because all our energy is coming from a green contract, so it's wind-powered elsewhere, we felt actually we'd better focus our energy on other things, and that's what we've been doing. However, as was said in the presentation, there's good and bad about what's happening at the moment. So the cost of energy is going up again. The life of the panels is so much better than it was before when we first started putting them on. Or an opportunity now. Let's not look back. We've got to look forward. So I would say we're definitely looking at it now. We're talking about it this week in our environment group to pick that agenda up again. I expect us to be doing those again because it looks as though the life and the economics are going to swing back around again. And as Sam said, We can't 100% sure we're going to keep our green contract going forward for the power. It's a bit unknown at the moment, so local power generation is back on for us as well.
Gentleman at the back there.
Hello there. Yeah, just a question for Ed, really. I think you acknowledge, and I think most people do, it is system change we need. And as we went through the COVID lockdown, you know, we had everybody exalting the fact that we were all enjoying a simpler life, a greener life, we're watching nature flourish around us. Yet as soon as it's over, so many of us seem to be back to normal. I mean, you mentioned there your, the profits from your holiday business have gone up because people are jumping on flights again, you know, and they're almost forgetting everything that they enjoyed back in lockdown. So with the government, you know, Conservative government, Labour government, how do we actually get to that system change?
Listen to the future notes. No, I mean, I think we have very short memories. We forget those lessons very quickly. And also, I think because of some of the inherent trauma, we want to move beyond, you know, that potential reset that we had. I mean, the French philosopher Blaise Pascal said, most of humanity's problems come from, or most of man, he said it in the 18th century, so we'll forgive him, but he said most of man's problems come from his inability to sit alone in a room by himself, in his own company. And lockdown was perhaps an amazing moment for that reflection, but how we get that systems change in, I think, is through the social networks and the discussions, because these things are contagious. I often wonder what the conversation would have been like amongst the Rochdale pioneers if they could see the scale of the global cooperative movement today. You know, I think it's 1 billion people on the planet are members of co-ops. About 10% of people in employment in the world are in co-ops. And arguably, you know, that was a form of system change which they pioneered, which is still with us today. So I do think, why I said at the end, I think it's about talking about these things, it's about normalizing them, it's about us acting as informed and enlightened citizens and holding our leaders to account, whichever end of the political spectrum they're on, because that's where the change has to come. And stop buying things from crap companies. I mean, all of the obvious stuff goes on in there, but you know, the whole nature of a system means that you have to change it as a system. And one of the reasons I spend so much time on narrative as to, you know, how effed are we, why are we effed, how do we un-eff ourselves, is because Donella Meadows, one of the world's most famous systems change scientists and philosophers, said that the most powerful way you intervene in a system is to change the story of the system. And the story of our system right now is one of fairly naked, individualistic-based capitalism. And the people and the organisation represented in this room represents one of the antidotes to that in terms of a collaborative, collective responsibility that cares. And so, you know, you guys are part of the system change. And it is about amplifying the type of ethos and behaviours and practices that go on within co-ops to try and take that back into the mainstream.
Another gentleman just at the back there, behind you, Rick.
Sir, I'm aware that the Secretary-General of the United Nations has said very clearly no new exploration for fossil fuels. I wonder if you'd comment on that in relation to our government. And can I give a follow-up question? Please, can we have a recording of your presentation to use widely?
Yes, by all means. I mean, as I said, with all due respect to Steve, I am going to make political points because I think, you know, any objective analysis of our current political leadership, regardless of your own political affiliation, if you can't see that we're being found wanting, then you need to, I suggest you need to kind of squeegee your pineal eye a little bit and look a bit more clearly. I mean, the problem with the energy, even the windfall tax, you know, there's so many loopholes in that which have actually allowed and given the fossil fuel companies a green light for further exploration. Even the International Energy Agency, which for the last 30 years has basically been the apologist for the fossil fuel industry, behind which all of the fossil fuel players have hid by saying, you know, we've got our net zero trajectory, and they've used the IEA as a sort of fig leaf of respectability. Last year, the International Agency and their chair, Fatih Birol, came out and said, we don't need any new oil and gas exploration globally to meet net zero trajectories. And beyond any fields already identified in 21, no, and that's the International Energy Agency saying that. So none of us should be doing it. You know, there is enough in existing fields, there is more there in existing fields than we can actually burn anyway. And this is why I didn't get into this. I mean, you'll probably get the impression I can talk about a lot of this stuff for hours. Luckily, you won't be inflicted with that. But, you know, our stock markets are carrying an enormous carbon bubble, because all of those unexplored reserves that those fossil fuel businesses hold on their accounts are in question in terms of their value. And all of our pensions are invested in them. Unless you have actively excluded yourself, then it feels like payback time at the moment because it's boom time. But don't make any assumptions about the long-term viability and solidity of those investments, as what is likely to happen is going to be, as I say, uncertainty and a very, very bumpy ride, where the value of these types of investments is going to be more volatile. I think one thing we've also learned, you know, through the last few months since Ukraine kicked off, is that fossil fuels are also price volatile and intermittent in supply. All the arguments that are put against renewables. And actually, you know, we've realized that when you can't secure your oil and gas, you get into big trouble. And those supply lines are not secure either. So, as I said, this is a unique moment in time for a transformative vision of energy, sustainability, resilience, security, and independence. And crucially, one in which we are co-owners and active players, not a linear industrial pipe where we sit on the end of it and are forced to pay the bill that lands on our mat.
Thank you. Do we have a last question or two? There's one. There's two more coming down. There's a lady there, please. Then there's 1, 2, 3 over there. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened to all of this and I've glanced around and looked at the age profile of a lot of the people who are here. And with the greatest respect both to our speakers and to the rest of the audience, there's not a lot that we as individuals are going to be able to do. But I question whether as the co-op perhaps we could start initiatives in educating youngsters that you don't eat out of ready meals, that you don't buy sandwiches packed already for you, that you can create your own meals, i.e. going back to basics, whether it's using meat, whether it's using plant-based foods, that they can create and therefore are going to be a little bit more confident to do in the future, educate their own families, because believe you me, we've missed a whole generation or two in educating people with hands-on to food.
Very good point, thank you. Sam, do you want to have a word on it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point and valid question. So you might have recalled that a bit earlier in the presentation we talked about some of the money that we'd raised for food sustainability projects. And actually quite a few of those projects were about actually teaching people to cook, and not just young people, like you said, at different generations. And I think for us, our approach is very much about partnership. So it might not be something, it's certainly something we would consider that we take on ourselves, but I think it's really important. There are a lot of amazing groups and charities out there doing some of this grassroots work already with organisations. Some of them linked in with things like food banks, about saying, you know, how to actually make the most and how to use your money, and spin-offs from that. So I think that there's definitely a space for us to work with other people and do that to really help people. It's something we've done intermittently over the years, and definitely something we can continue to look at.
Thank you, Sam. Now, I think there's one gentleman over there, 2 or 3 in front, yeah.
Hello. I just wanted to say it's great that you are doing the soft plastic recycling in the food stores, well, many of the food stores. But when are pharmacies going to start taking back blister packs, medicines, and all those tablet packs that just sit around and aren't recycled?
Yeah, so this is actually... Sorry, are you happy for me to answer?
No,
Sorry,
please carry
just
on.
jumped straight in there, too keen. Yeah, this is something we have looked into. There is actually only at the moment that we can find one company that actually does the blister pack recycling. It's not a common thing that you can do because it's quite a process where they have to heat it, peel the foil off and things. And it's actually something, so you may be aware that there's a couple of other chains that do this. They only do it in a few branches, and the reason being is it's very, very expensive. It's a very, very labour-intensive process. We looked into doing that in our pharmacies, and I can't remember what the cost was, but we're talking tens of thousands of pounds in order to do that. So I think it's something we'd be keen to do, but the market needs to cope up. And we actually spoke to our waste contractor to see if it's something that they're doing and asked them to go away and challenge them to look at it as well. So it is on our horizon, but at the moment it's not something that is viable for us to do.
Thank you, Sam. Do we have any more questions, please? Yes. Excuse me.
Apologies, I was late coming into the discussion, so if you've already covered this, my apologies. In a bid to reduce food waste, have you made any commitments as the Lincolnshire Co-op to pair with phone applications such as Too Good To Go to make sure that the food that is usable can be utilised by people that need it rather than it ending up in landfill?
I think, Sam, that's a good one for you.
Yeah, I won't jump straight in this time. Yeah, so we did cover it slightly. We didn't mention Too Good To Go and Olio, which are two of the apps. We've actually looked into those, and we did a trial with Too Good To Go in some of our stores. And actually, the results of that were that we weren't distributing any more food doing that than through our normal reduce to clear policies, and actually it was taking up more time and more labour to do that than actually it going through our usual processes. What you might have missed was the bit where we talked about we've done a trial in 20-something of our stores in the Lincoln area with Fair Share to redistribute the food to charities, but actually again because the volume of our waste is so low, much lower than most of our kind of competitors, again that wasn't sustainable to have vehicles driving and collecting it. So we are now looking at another kind of iteration of that where we're looking at linking local food charities direct to our stores and seeing if that's a route where we can get the last bit of the food, because we don't have a lot left, that surplus food reused. But for us, the Too Good To Go and Olio and some of those apps just actually didn't work to reduce food waste. And also we have to pay a considerable amount of money to be part of them, so it wasn't feasible for us. But we are taking food waste seriously.
Thank you, Sam. Gentleman here, halfway up, and there's another person a bit further back.
If the answer to blister packs is that they're too difficult to recycle, isn't the answer just to eliminate them?
I'm not sure that's one that we can answer because obviously it's such a part, it's part of that system, and I'm not sure that we've got the answer. I can see that Alistair, who is our purchaser of drugs, he's our drug dealer within the business.
In the best possible way.
Alistair, do you want to comment?
Once upon a time, we used to get packs and everything, but this simply doesn't exist anymore. And the statistic move towards 20.
Alistair, come to borrow a microphone.
So I say, once upon a time, when I was a boy, we used to get big dispensing packs of paracetamol and everything, and you put them into little plastic bottles and gave them out. Now there's a big move to get everything into 28-day dispensing packs. So pretty much every medicine now comes in a 28-day pack. So really, from my point of view as a purchaser, I don't have that option. We obviously do these dosette boxes where it would be a lot easier if we could have bulk packs to dispense from, but as I say, they simply don't exist in the market anymore.
Thank you.
Just wondered if it'd be possible to have to be able to see the slides, whether they might be available afterwards for us to view, because there was obviously some very interesting information which was whizzed past quite quickly. I'd like to go back and have a look at those.
Okay, thank you. I think there's...
I work in a food store, and obviously all the stuff that we get bought in is on unis that have two sides, so they're the cages, all the produce and stock and all that. And when we get rid of them, all the card waste, the green plastic trays that you see the produce on, they're put back on the unis, and then they're wrapped with cling film every time. How can that be justified using these two-sided unis when the co-op used to use four-sided unis that didn't need wrapping at all? That's my question.
Sam, is that you want to pick up on the broader recycling front, or
I think that it's a Matt question, from food, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. The reason for the change is that the cardboard is now backhauled through our central cooperative retail logistics network because it's more efficient that way. So rather than having it go through a separate supplier, another lorry coming back, it's more efficient to have just one vehicle visiting the store. In terms of why they've shifted from four-sided unit owners to two-sided unit owners, I can't answer that. So that is something we will take back. We do have a input into the CRL group, so I will push that back. But the simple reason why it's wrapped in plastic is so that the cardboard doesn't blow away when it's in storage and cause damage elsewhere. But it's a good question, and I'll take that one back.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions, please?
I have seen in foreign countries that in order to limit the amount of plastic in bottles, they go back to glass. And what they do is that they pay back 5 pence, let's say 5 pence per bottle when you bring the bottle back. I know as a child that's what was happening. You had your bottle of milk, you were taking it back to the co-op, and they would give you a bit of money for the empty bottles. I was wondering if it was something that the co-op would consider going back to. You would need a bank, bottle bank, where people drop the bottles and they would get their money. Is it something worthwhile considering?
So I look at the panel. Who would like to answer that? Is that a food question again, or is it a recycling, or is it?
I'll start, Matt, and help me out if I need it, please. So I think that's more of a national conversation in terms of where do we shift from plastic back to glass, and if so, what are the recycling schemes to enable that to happen? I know there's trials going on in other parts of the UK around taking glass bottles back to retailers and plastic as well. So I think we've just got to watch that national picture. I don't think Lincolnshire Co-op on its own could really initiate that, because it'd have to be a whole supply chain solution, which we'll keep an eye on it and obviously support it if it starts to evolve.
Thank you, Steve. Any more questions, please, before we close?
I've got not really a question, but I was wondering, none of the electric charging points have the price.
Would you just mind waiting for a microphone, just to make sure everybody can hear you? Thank you.
I was wondering why none of the electric charging car parts have the price on the pump.
That's a very good question, which I, for one, am not able to answer. Matt, I think.
We're all looking blank at each other. I think it's a damn good question, if I'm being honest. So Matt's looking at me, I'm looking at Nick.
It's a good question. Can we get back to you, please, unless you have an answer?
Yes, so the current charge points that we have in stores are supplied by a company called BP Pulse, who that we work with in partnership. I think it's a different cost per kilowatt unit, depending on whether or not you're a standalone user or you're part of their BP Pulse monthly club. So that's the reason why it's not X per kilowatt hour, because if you're part of their monthly club, you get a reduced rate. All we're doing is facilitating their charging points being on our site. So I think it's 45p per kilowatt, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong. If you're a standalone user who just wants to pay by credit card, if you're part of their charging club, you get it at a reduced rate.
Thanks, Matt. Any more questions? And that was a very good question, the last question. Thank you, I learned something from it. Any more questions? In that case, I'd like to thank Ed, Sam and Steve for answering those questions for us. I found it most helpful. Thank you. And that now concludes the end of our broadcast meeting. It just remains for me to thank everyone that has been involved for all their hard work in making today a success. And with special thanks to our guest speaker, Ed Gillespie, and all those in our exhibition and breakout room areas. We would also like to thank the team at Lumi and Peachy who have facilitated and broadcast the meeting out to our online members today. Thank you. And of course, a big thank you goes to all of you for joining us today. And we'll be adding £5 of dividend onto the account of every member that has joined us online or in the room today. This will be available to spend from Tuesday by using your dividend card, key fob and mobile app. Now's the time. And on a slightly more serious note, we are always looking at ways to improve our members' experiences and are grateful for any feedback that we receive. Bearing this in mind, I would like to invite you to complete a survey on your experience of today's meeting. This can be completed on our website. The survey will close on Monday the 20th of June 2022. And finally, on behalf of my colleagues on the Board of Directors, the Executive Management Team and colleagues here today, we sincerely hope you have enjoyed it, and if you're with us in person, please stay around and join our exhibition and breakout sessions. Thank you.